Spoken Realms and Mike Vendetti Productions proudly present The Glass Dome Clock by Ellery Queen, narrated by Mike Vendetti. 1. Of all the hundreds of criminal cases in the solution of which Mr. Ellery Queen participated by virtue of his self-imposed authority as son of the famous Inspector Queen of the New York Detective Bureau, he has steadfastly maintained that none offered a simpler diagnosis than the case which he has designated as the adventure of the glass dome clock. So simple, he likes to say sincerely, that a sophomore student in high school with the most elementary knowledge of algebraic mathematics would find it as easy to solve as the merest equation. He has been asked, as a result of such remarks, what a poor, untutored first-grade detective on the regular police force, whose training in algebra might be something less than elementary, could be expected to make of such a simple case. His invariably serious response has been, "Amendment accepted." The resolution now reads, "Anybody with common sense would have solved that crime. It's as basic as 5 minus 4 leaves 1. This was a little cruel, when it is noted that among those who had opportunity, and certainly wishfulness, to solve the crime was Mr. Ellery Queen's own father. The inspector certainly not the most stupid of criminal investigators. But then Mr. Ellery Queen, for all his mental prowess, is sometimes prone to confuse his definitions, viz., his uncanny capacity for strict logic is far from the average citizen's common sense. Certainly, one would not be inclined to term elementary problem in which such components as the following figured: a pure purple amethyst, a somewhat bedraggled expatriate from Tsarist Russia, a silver loving cup, a poker game, 5 birthday encomiums, and, of course, that peculiarly ugly relic of early Americana catalogued as the glass dome clock, among others. On the surface, the thing seems too utterly fantastic, a howling maniac's nightmare. Anybody with Ellery's cherished common sense would have said so. Yet, when he arranged those weird elements in their proper order and pointed out the obvious answer to the riddle with that almost monastic intellectual innocence of his, as if everybody possessed his genius for piercing the veil of complexities. Inspector Queen, good Sergeant Velly, and the others figuratively rubbed their eyes. The thing was so clear. It began, as numbers do, with a corpse. From the first, the eeriness of the whole business struck those who stood around in the faintly musk atmosphere of Martin Orr's curio shop that stared down at the shambles that had been Martin Orr. Inspector Queen, for one, refused to credit the evidence of his old senses, although it was not the gory nature of the crime that gave him pause, for he was as familiar with scenes of carnage as a butcher, and blood no longer made him squeamish. That Martin Orr, the celebrated little Fifth Avenue curio dealer, whose establishment was a treasure house of authentic rarities, had had his shiny little bald head bashed to red ruin. This was an indifferent if practical detail. The bludgeon, a heavy paperweight, spattered with blood but wiped clean of fingerprints, lay not far from the body. So that much was clear. No, it was not the assault on Orr that opened their eyes, but what Orr had apparently done as he lay gasping out his life on the cold cement floor of his shop after the assault. The reconstruction of events after Orr's assailant had fled the shop, leaving the curio dealer for dead, seemed perfectly legible, having been struck down in the main chamber of his establishment toward the rear. Martin Orr had dragged his broken body 6 feet along a counter. The red trail told the story plainly. Had by superhuman effort raised himself to a case of precious and semi-precious stones, had smashed the thin glass with a feeble fist, had groped about among the gem trays, grasped a large unset amethyst, fallen back to the floor with the stone tightly clutched in his left hand, had then crawled on a tangent 5 feet past a table full of old clocks to a stone pedestal, raised himself again, and deliberately dragged off the pedestal the object it supported, an old clock with a glass dome over it, so that the clock fell to the floor by his side, shattering its fragile case into 1,000 pieces. And there Martin Orr had died. In his left fist the amethyst, his bleeding right hand resting on the clock as if in benediction. By some miracle the clock's machinery had not been injured in the fall. It had been one of Martin Orr's fetishes to keep all his magnificent old clocks running, and to the bewildered ears of the little knot of men surrounding Martin Orr's corpse, that gray Sunday morning, came the pleasant tick, tick, tick of the no longer glass-domed clock. Weird. It was insane. There ought to be a law against it, growled Sergeant Bailey. 2. Dr. Samuel Prouty, assistant medical examiner of New York County, rose from his examination of the body and prodded Martin Orr's dead buttocks. The curio dealer was lying face down with his foot. "Now here's an odd coot," he said grumpily. 60 if he's a day, with more real stamina than many a youngster. Marvelous powers of resistance. He took a fearful beating about the head and shoulders. His assailant left him for dead, and the old monkey clung to life long enough to make a tour about the place. Many a young man would have died in his tracks. "Your professional admiration leaves me cold," said Ellery. He had been awakened out of a pleasantly warm bed not a half hour before to find Una, the Queen's gypsy boy of all work, shaking him. The inspector had already gone, leaving word for Ellery, if he should be so minded, to follow. Ellery was always so minded when his nose sniffed crime. But he had not had breakfast, and he was thoroughly out of temper. So his taxicab had rushed through Fifth Avenue to Martin Orr's shop, and he had found the inspector and Sergeant Bailey already on the cluttered scene, interrogating a grief-stunned old woman, Martin Orr's aged widow, and a badly frightened Slavic giant who introduced himself in garbled English as the ex-Duke Paul. The ex-Duke Paul, it developed, had been one of Nicholas Romanov's innumerable cousins caught in the whirlpool of the Russian Revolution, who had managed to flee the homeland and was eking out a none too fastidious living in New York as a sort of social curiosity. This was in 1926, when Royal Russian expatriates were still something of a novelty in the land of democracy. As Ellery pointed out much later, this was not only 1926, but precisely Sunday, March the 7th, 1926, although at the time it seemed ridiculous to consider the specific date of any importance whatsoever. "Who found the body?" demanded Ellery, puffing at his first cigarette of the day. "His snibs here," said Sergeant Bailey, hunching his colossal shoulders. "And the lady. Seems like the Duke, or whatever he is, has been working a racket. Been a kind of stooge for the old duck that was murdered, or used to give him commissions on the customers he brought in. And I understand he brought in plenty. Anyway, Mrs. Orr here got sort of worried when her hubby didn't come home that night from the poker game. Poker game? The Russian's dark face lighted up. Yes, yes, it is a remarkable game. I have learned it since my sojourn in your amazing country. Mr. Orr, myself, and some others here play each week. Yes. His face fell, and some of his fright returned. He looked fleetingly at the corpse and began to edge away. You played last night? Asked Ellery in a savage voice. The Russian nodded. Inspector Queen said, We're rounding them up. It seemed that Orr, the Duke, and 4 other men had a sort of poker club, and met in Orr's back room every Saturday night and played till all hours. Looked over that back room, but there was nothing there except the cards and chips. When Orr didn't come home, Mrs. Orr got frightened and called up the Duke. He lives at some squirrely little hotel in the 40s. The Duke called for her. They came down here this morning. This is what they found. The inspector eyed Martin Orr's corpse and the debris of glass surrounding him with gloom, almost with resentment. Crazy, isn't it? Ellery glanced at Mrs. Orr. She was leaning against the counter, frozen-faced, tearless, staring down at her husband's body as if she could not believe her eyes. Actually, there was little to see, for Dr. Prouty had flung outspread sheets of Sunday newspaper over the body, and only the left hand, still clutching the amethyst, was visible. Undoubtedly so, said Ellery dryly. I suppose there's a desk in the back room where Orr kept his accounts? Sure. Any paper on Orr's body? Paper? Repeated the inspector in bewilderment. Why, no. Pencil or pen? No. Why, for heaven's sake? Before Ellery could reply, a little old man with a face like a wrinkled brown papyrus pushed past the detective at the front door. He walked like a man in a dream, his gaze fixed on the shapeless body and the bloodstains. There, incredibly, he blinked 4 times and began to cry. His weazened frame jerked with sobs. Mrs. Orr awoke from her trance and cried, "Oh, Sam, Sam!" and putting her arms around the newcomer's racked shoulders, began to weep with him. Ellery and the inspector looked at each other, and Sergeant Bill belched his disgust. Then the inspector grasped the crying man's little arm and shook him. "Here, stop that," he said gruffly. "Who are you?" The man raised his tear-stained face from Mrs. Orr's shoulder. He blubbered, Sam Mingo, Sam Mingo. Mr. Orr's assistant who, oh, I can't believe it." And he buried his face in Mrs. Orr's shoulder again. "Got to let him cry himself out, I guess," said the inspector, shrugging. "Ellery, what the deuce do you make of it?" "I'm stymied." Ellery raised his eyebrows eloquently. A detective appeared in the street door, escorting a pale, trembling man. "Here's Arnold Pike, Chief. Dug him out of bed just now." Pike was a man of powerful physique and jutting jaw, but he was thoroughly unnerved and somehow bewildered. He fastened his eyes on the heap which represented Martin Orr's mortal remains, and kept mechanically buttoning and unbuttoning his overcoat. The inspector said, "I understand you and a few others played poker in the back room here last night with Orr. What time did you break up?" 12:30. Pike's face wobbled drunkenly. "What time did you start?" "Around 7. "Cripes," said Inspector Queen. "That's not a poker game. That's a game of tiddlywinks. Who killed Orr, Mr. Pike?" Arnold Pike tore his eyes from the corpse. "God, sir, I don't know." "You don't, eh? All friends, were you?" "Yes, oh, yes." "What's your business, Mr. Pike?" "I'm a stockbroker." "Why," began Ellery and stopped. Under the urging of 2 detectives, 3 men advanced into the shop, all frightened, all exhibiting evidences of hasty awakening and hasty dressing, all fixing their eyes at once on the paper-covered bundle on the floor, the streaks of blood, the shattered glass. The three, like the incredible ex-Duke Paul, who was straight and stiff and somehow ridiculous, seemed petrified, men crushed by a sudden blow. A small fat man with brilliant eyes muttered that he was Stanley Oxman, jeweler, Martin Orr's oldest, closest friend. He could not believe it. It was frightful, unheard of. Martin murdered? No, he could offer no explanation. Martin had been a peculiar man, perhaps, but as far as he, Oxman, knew, the curio dealer had not had an enemy in the world. And so on, as the other two stood by, frozen, waiting their turn. One was a lean, debauched fellow with a mark of the ex-athlete about him. His slight paunch and yellowed eyeballs could not conceal the signs of a vigorous prime. This was, said Orman, their mutual friend, Leo Gurney, the newspaper feature writer. The other was J.D. Vincent, said Oxman, developing an unexpected streak of talkativeness, which the inspector fanned gently, who, like Arnold Pike, was in Wall Street, a manipulator, whatever that was. Vincent, a stocky man with the gambler's tight face, seemed incapable of speech. As for Gurney, he seemed glad that Oxman had constituted himself spokesman, and kept staring at the body on the cement floor. Ellery sighed, thought of his warm bed, put down the rebellion in his breakfastless stomach, and went to work, keeping an ear cocked for the inspector's sharp questions and the halting replies. Ellery followed the streaks of blood to the spot where Orr had ravished the case of gems. Case, its glass front smashed, little frazzled splinters framing the orifice, contained more than a dozen metal trays, floored with black velvet, set in 2 rows. Each held scores of gems, a brilliant array of semi-precious and precious stones beautifully variegated in color. 2 trays in the center of the front row attracted his eye particularly, one containing highly polished stones of red, brown, yellow, and green, the other a single variety, all of a subtranslucent quality, leek green in color and covered with small red spots. Ellery noted that both these trays were in direct line with the place where Orr's hand had smashed the glass case. He went over to the trembling little assistant, Sam Mingo, who had quieted down and was standing by Mrs. Orr, clutching her hand like a child. "Mingo," he said, touching the man. Mingo started with a leap of his stringy muscles. "Don't be alarmed, Mingo. Just step over here with me for a moment." Ellery smiled reassuringly, took the man's arm, and led him to the shattered case. And Ellery said, "How is it that Martin Orr bothered with such trifles as these? I see rubies here and emeralds, but the others? Was he a lapidary as well as a curio dealer?" Orr's assistant mumbled, No, he was not. But he always liked the baubles, he called them, kept them for love. Most of them are birthstones. He sold a few. This is a complete line. What are these green stones with the red spots? Bloodstones. And this tray of red, brown, yellow, and green ones? All jaspers. The common ones are red, brown, and yellow. The few green ones in the tray are more valuable. The bloodstone is itself a variety of jasper, beautiful and— Yes, said Ellery hastily. From which tray did the amethyst in Orr's hand come, Mingo? Mingo shivered and pointed a crinkled forefinger to a tray in the rear row at the corner of the case. All the amethysts are kept in this one tray? Yes, you can see for yourself. Here, growled the inspector, approaching. "Mingo, I want you to look over the stock. Check everything. See if anything's been stolen." "Yes, sir," said Orr's assistant timidly, and began to potter about the shop with lagging steps. Ellery looked about. The door to the back room was 25 feet from the spot where Orr had been assaulted. "No desk in the shop itself," he observed. "No paper about." "Well, son," said the inspector in troubled tones, "it looks as if we're on the trail of something. I don't like it. Finally dragged it out of these birds. I thought it was funny, this business of breaking up a weekly Saturday night poker game at 12:30. They had a fight. Who engaged in fisticuffs with whom? Oh, don't be funny. It's this Pike feller, the stockbroker. Seems they all had something to drink during the game. They played stud and Orr with an ace, king, queen, jack showing. Raised the roof off the play. Everybody dropped out except Pike. He had 3 sixes. Well, Orr gave it everything he had, and when Pike threw his cards away on a big over-raise, Orr cackled, shows his whole card, a deuce, and raked in the pot. Pike, who'd lost his pile on the hand, began to grumble. He and Orr had words. You know how those things start. They were all pied anyway, says the Duke. Almost a fist fight. The others interfered, but it broke up their game. They all left together? Yes. Orr stayed behind to clean up the mess in the back room. 5 others went out together and separated a few blocks away. Any one of them could have come back and pulled off the job before Orr shut up shop. And what does Pike say? What the deuce would you expect him to say? That he went right home and to bed, of course. And the others? They deny any knowledge of what happened after they left here last night. Well, Mingo, anything missing? Mingo said helplessly. Everything seems to be all right. I thought so, said the inspector with satisfaction. This is a grudge kill, son. Well, I want to talk to these fellows some more. What's eating you? Ellery lighted a cigarette. Few random thoughts. Have you decided in your own mind why Orr dragged himself about the shop when he was 3/4 dead, broke the glass dome clock, pulled an amethyst out of the gem case? That, said the inspector, the troubled look returning, is what I'm all foggy about. I can't. Excuse me. He returned hastily to the waiting group of men. Ellery took Mingo's lax arm. Get a grip on yourself, man. I want you to look at that smashed clock for a moment. Don't be afraid of Orr. Dead men don't bite, Mingo. He pushed the little assistant toward the paper-covered corpse. Now, tell me something about that clock. Has it a history? Not much of one. It's 169 years old. Not especially valuable. Curious piece because of the glass dome over it. Happens to be the only glass dome clock we have. That's all. Ellery polished the lenses of his pince-nez, set the glasses firmly on his nose, and bent over to examine the falling clock. It had a black wooden base, circular, about 9 inches deep, and scarified with age. On this the clock was set, ticking away cozily. The dome of glass had fitted into a groove around the top of the black base, sheathing the clock completely. With the dome unshattered, the entire package must have stood about 2 feet high. Ellery rose, and his lean face was thoughtful. Mingo looked at him in a sort of stupid anxiety. Did Pike, Oxman, Vincent, Gurney, or Paul ever own this piece? Mingo shook his head. No, sir. We've had it for many years. We couldn't get rid of it. Certainly those gentlemen didn't want it. Then none of the 5 ever tried to purchase the clock?" "Of course not." "Admirable," said Ellery. "Thank you." Mingo felt that he had been dismissed. He hesitated, shuffled his feet, and finally went over to the silent widow and stood by her side. Ellery knelt on the cement floor and with difficulty loosened the grip of the man's fingers about the amethyst. He saw that the stone was a clear, glowing purple in color, shook his head as if in perplexity, and rose. Vincent, the stocky Wall Street gambler with the tight face, was saying to the inspector in a rusty voice, "Can't see why you suspect any of us, Pike particularly. What's in it a little quarrel? We've always been good friends, all of us. Last night we were pickled." "Sure," said the inspector gently. "Last night you were pickled. A drunk sort of forgets himself at times, Vincent. Liquor affects the man's morals as well as his head." "Nuts," said the yellow-eyeballed Gurney suddenly. "Stop sleuthing, Inspector. You're barking up the wrong tree. Vincent's right. We're all friends. It was Pike's birthday last week." Ellery stood very still. "We all sent him gifts. Had a celebration, and Orr was the cockiest of us all. Does that look like a preparation for a payoff?" Ellery stepped forward, and his eyes were shining. All his temper had fled by now, and his nostrils were quivering with the scent of the chase. "And when was the celebration held, gentlemen?" he asked softly. Stanley Oxman puffed out his cheeks. "Now they're going to suspect a birthday blowout. Last Monday, mister. This past Monday. What of it?" "This past Monday," said Ellery. "How nice. Mr. Pike, your gift?" "For God's sake!" Pike's eyes were tortured. "When did you receive them?" "After the party, during the week. Boys sent them up to me. I didn't see any of them until last night at the poker game." The others nodded their heads in concert. The inspector was looking at Ellery with puzzlement. Ellery grinned, adjusted his pince-nez, and spoke to his father aside. The weight of the inspector's puzzlement, if his face was a scale, increased. But he said quietly to the white-haired broker, "Mr. Pike, you're going to take a little trip with Mr. Queen and Sergeant Velly, just for a few moments. The others, you stay here with me. Mr. Pike, please remember not to try anything foolish." Pike was incapable of speech. His head twitched sideways, and he buttoned his coat for the 20th time. Nobody said anything. Sergeant Velly took Pike's arm, and Ellie preceded them into the early morning peace of Fifth Avenue. On the sidewalk, he asked Pike his address. The broker dreamily gave him a street and number. Ellery hailed a taxicab, and the three men were driven in silence to an apartment building a mile farther uptown. They took a self-service elevator to the 7th floor, marched a few steps to a door. Pike fumbled with a key, and they went into his apartment. "Let me see your gifts, please," said Ellery, without expression, the first words uttered since they had stepped into the taxicab. Pike led them to a den-like room. On a table stood 4 boxes of different shapes and a handsome silver cup. He said in a cracked voice. Ellery went swiftly to the table, picked up the silver cup. On it was engraved a sentimental legend. "To a true friend, Arnold Pike, March 1st, 1876, to J.D. Vincent." "Rather macabre humor, Mr. Pike," said Ellery, setting the cup down. "Since Vincent has had space left for the date of your demise." Pike began to speak, then shivered and clamped his pale lips together. Ellery removed the lid of a tiny black box. Inside, embedded in a cleft between 2 pieces of purple velvet, there was a man's signet ring, a magnificent and heavy circlet, the signet of which revealed The coat of arms of royalist Russia. The tattered old eagle, murmured Ellery. Let's see what our friend the ex-duke has to say. On a card in the box, inscribed in minute script, the following was written in French. To my good friend Arnold Pike on his 50th birthday. March the first ever makes me sad. I remember that day in 1917, 2 weeks before the Tsar's abdiction. The quiet, then the storm. But be merry, Arnold. Accept this signet ring, given to me by my royal cousin as a token of my esteem. Long life, Paul. Ellery did not comment. He restored the ring and card to the box and picked up another, a large flat packet. Inside there was a gold-tipped Morocco-leather wallet. The card tucked into one of the pockets said, 21 years of life's rattle, and men are no longer boys. They gird their loins for battle and throw away their toys. But here's a cheerful plaything for a white-haired old mooncalf, who may act like any May thing for 9 years more and a half. Charming verse, chuckled Ellery. Another misbegotten poet. Only a newspaper man would indite such nonsense. This is Gurney's? Yes, muttered Pike. It's nice, isn't it? If you'll pardon me, said Ellery, it's rotten. He threw aside the wallet and seized a larger carton. Inside there was a glittering pair of patent leather carpet slippers. The card attached read, Happy birthday, Arnold. May we be all together on as pleasant a March 1st to celebrate your 100th anniversary, Martin. The poor prophet, said Ellery dryly. And what's this? He laid the shoebox down and picked up a small felt box. In it he saw a gold-plated cigarette case with the initials A.P. engraved on the lid. The accompanying card read, Good luck on your 50th birthday. I look forward to your 60th on March 1st, 1936, for another bout of whoopee. Stanley Oxman. And Mr. Stanley Oxman, remarked Ellery, putting down the cigarette case, was a little less sanguine than Martin Orr. His imagination reached no further than 60, Mr. Pike. A significant point. I can't see, began the broker in a stubborn little mutter, why you have to bring my friends into it. Sergeant Villy gripped his elbow, and he winced. Ellery shook his head disapprovingly at the Man Mountain. And now, Mr. Pike, I think we may return to Martin Orr's shop, or, as the sergeant might fastidiously phrase it, the scene of the crime. Very interesting. Very interesting. It almost compensates for an empty belly. You got something? Whispered Sergeant Villy hoarsely as Pike preceded them into a taxicab downstairs. Cyclops, said Ellery. All God's children got something, but I got everything. 3. Sergeant Villy disappeared somewhere en route to the curio shop, and Arnold Pike's spirits lifted at once. Ellery eyed him quizzically. One thing, Mr. Pike, he said as the taxicab turned into Fifth Avenue, before we disembark. How long have you 6 men been acquainted? The broker sighed. It's complicated. My only friend of considerable duration is Leo. Gurney, you know. Known each other for 15 years. But then Orr and the Duke have been friends since 1918. Understand, and of course, Stan Oxman and Orr have knew each other for many years. I met Vincent about a year ago through my business affiliations and introduced him into our little clique. Had you yourself and the others, Oxman or Paul, been acquainted before this time 2 years ago? Pike looked puzzled. I don't see. Why, no. I met Oxman and the Duke a year and a half ago through Orr. And that, murmured Ellery, is so perfect that I don't care if I never have breakfast. Here we are, Mr. Pike. They found a glum group awaiting their return. Nothing had changed except that Orr's body had disappeared. Dr. Pouty had gone, and some attempt at sweeping up the glass fragments of the dome clock had been made. The inspector was in a fever of impatience, demanded to know where Sergeant Finley was, what Ellery had sought at Pike's apartment. Ellery whispered something to him, and the old man looked startled. Then he dipped his fingers into his brown snuff-box and partook with grim relish. The regal expatriate cleared his bull throat. "You have mystery resolved," he rumbled. "Yes." "Your Highness," said Ellery gravely, "I have indeed mystery resolved." He whirled and clapped his palms together. They jumped. "Attention, please. Pickett," he said to a detective, "stand at that door and don't let anyone in but Sergeant Valley." The detective nodded. Ellery studied the faces about him. If one of them was apprehensive, he had ample control of his physiognomy. They all seemed merely interested now that the first shock of the tragedy had passed them by. Mrs. Orr clung to Mingo's fragile hand. Her eyes did not once leave Ellery's face. The fat little jeweler, the journalist, the two Wall Street men, the Russian expatriate. "An absorbing affair," grinned Ellery, "and quite elementary despite its points of interest. Follow me closely." He went over to the corner and picked up the purple amethyst which had been clutched in the dead man's hand. He looked at it and smiled. Then he glanced at the other object on the counter, the round-based clock with the fragments of its glass dome protruding from the circular groove. Consider this situation. Martin Orr, brutally beaten about the head, manages in a last desperate living action to crawl to the jewel case on the counter, pick out this gem, then go to the stone pedestal and pull the glass dome clock from it. Whereupon, his mysterious mission accomplished, he dies. Why should a dying man engage in such a baffling procedure? There can be only one general explanation. He knows his assailant and is endeavoring to leave clues to his assailant's identity. At this point the inspector nodded, and Ellery grinned again behind the curling smoke of his cigarette. But such clues! Why? Well, what would you expect a dying man to do if he wished to leave behind the name of his murderer? The answer is obvious. He would write it. But on Orr's body we find no paper, pen, or pencil, and no paper in the immediate vicinity. Where else might he secure writing materials? Well, you observe that Martin Orr was assaulted at a spot 25 feet from the door of the back room. The distance Orr must have felt was too great for his failing strength. Then Orr couldn't write the name of his murderer except by the somewhat fantastic method of dipping his finger into his own blood and using the floor as a slate. Such an expedient probably didn't occur to him. He must have reasoned with rapidity, life ebbing out of him at every breath. Then he crawled to the case, broke the glass, took out the amethyst. Then he crawled to the pedestal and dragged off the glass dome clock. Then he died. So the amethyst and the clock were Martin Orr's bequest to the police. You can almost hear him say, "Don't fail me. This is clear, simple, easy. Punish my murderer." Mrs. Orr gasped, but the expression on her wrinkled face did not alter. Mingo began to sniffle. The others waited in total silence. "The clock first," said Ellery lazily. "The first thing one thinks of in connection with a timepiece is time. Was Orr trying then, by dragging the clock off the pedestal, to smash the works and, stopping the clock, so fix the time of his murder? Offhand a possibility, it is true. But if this was his purpose, it failed, because the clock didn't stop running after all. While this circumstance does not invalidate the time interpretation, further consideration of the whole problem does. For you 5 gentlemen had left Orr in a body. The time of the assault could not possibly be checked against your return to your several residences as to point inescapably to one of you as the murderer. Orr must have realized this, if he thought of it at all. In other words, there wouldn't be any particular point to such a purpose on Orr's part. And there is still another and more conclusive consideration that invalidates the time interpretation, and that is that Orr crawled past a table full of running clocks to get to this glass-domed one. If it had been time he was intending to indicate, he could have preserved his energies by stopping at the table and pulling down one of the many clocks upon it. But no, he deliberately passed that table to get to the glass-domed clock. So it wasn't time. Very well. Now, since the glass-domed clock is the only one of its kind in the shop, it must have been not time in the general sense, but this particular timepiece in the specific sense by which Martin Orr was motivated. But what could this particular timepiece possibly indicate in itself? As Mr. Mingo has informed me, it has no personal connection with anyone connected with Orr. The idea that Orr was leaving a clue to a clockmaker is unsound. None of you gentlemen follows that delightful craft, and certainly Mr. Oxman, the jeweler, could not have been indicated when so many things in the gem case would have served. Oxman began to perspire. He fixed his eyes on the jewel in Ellery's hand. Then it wasn't a professional meaning from the clock as a clock, continued Ellery equably, that Orr was trying to convey. But what is there about this particular clock which is different from the other clocks in the shop? Ellery shot his forefinger forward. This particular clock has a glass dome over it. He straightened slowly. Can any of you gentlemen think of a fairly common object almost perfectly suggested by a glass dome clock? No one answered, but Vincent and Pike began to lick their lips. "I see signs of intelligence," said Ellery. "Let me be more specific. What is it, I feel like Sam Lloyd, that has a base, a glass dome, and ticking machinery inside the dome?" Still no answer. "Well," said Ellery, "I suppose I should have expected reticence. Of course, it's a stock ticker." They stared at him, and then all eyes turned to examine the whitening faces of J.D. Vincent and Arnold Pike. "Yes," said Ellery, "you may well gaze upon the countenances of the Messrs. Vincent and Pike, for they are the only two of our little cast who are connected with stock tickers. Mr. Vincent is a Wall Street operator. Mr. Pike is a broker." Quietly 2 detectives left the wall and approached the 2 men. Whereupon, said Ellery, "We lay aside the glass dome clock and take up this very fascinating little bauble in my hand." He held up the amethyst, a purple amethyst. "There are blue-violet ones, you know. What could this purple amethyst have signified to Martin Orr's frantic brain. The obvious thing is that it is a jeweler. Mr. Oxman looked disgruntled a moment ago. You needn't be, sir. The jewelry significance of this amethyst is eliminated on 2 counts. The first is that the tray on which the amethysts lie is in a corner at the rear of the shattered case. It was necessary for Orr to reach far into the case. If it was a jewel he sought, why didn't he pick any one of the stones nearer to his palsied hand? For any single one of them would connotate jeweler. But no. Orr went to the excruciating trouble of ignoring what was close at hand, as is the business of the clock, and deliberately selected something from an inconvenient place. Then the amethyst did not signify a jeweler, but something else. The second is this. Mr. Oxman certainly, or knew that the clock ticker clue would not fix guilt on one person, for 2 of his cronies are connected with stocks. On the other hand, did Orr have 2 assailants rather than 1? Not likely, for if by the amethyst he meant to connotate you, Mr. Oxman, and by the glass dome clock he meant to connotate either Mr. Pike or Mr. Vincent, he was still leaving a wobbly trail, for we still would not know whether Mr. Pike or Mr. Vincent was meant. Did he have 3 assailants, then? You see, we are already in the realm of fantasy. No, the major probability is that, since the glass dome clock cut the possibilities down to 2 persons, the amethyst was meant to single out one of those 2. How does the amethyst pin one of these gentlemen down? What significance, besides the obvious one of jewelry, does the amethyst suggest? Well, it is a rich purple in color. Ah, but one of your courtiers fits here. His Highness, the ex-Duke, is certainly one born to the royal purple, even if it is an ex-ducal purple, as it were. The soldiery Russian growled, I am not, Highness. You know nothing of my royal address. His dark face became suffused with blood, and he broke into a volley of guttural Russian. Ellery grinned. Don't excite yourself, Your Grace, is it? You weren't meant. For if we postulate you, we again drag in a 3rd person and leave unsettled the question of which Wall Street man Orr meant to accuse. We're no better off than before. Avant royalty. Other possible significances? Yes. There is a species of hummingbird, for instance, known as the amethyst. Out, we have no aviaries here. For another thing, the amethyst was connected with ancient Hebrew ritual. An Orientalist told me this once. Breastplate decoration for the high priest, or some such thing. Obviously, inapplicable here. So there is only one other possible application. Ellery turned to the stocky gambler. Mr. Vincent, what is your birth date? Vincent stammered, November 2nd. Splendid. That eliminates you. Ellery stopped abruptly. There was a stir at the door, and Sergeant Vale barged in with a very grim face. Ellery smiled. Well, Sergeant, was my hunch about motive correct? Ellery said, And how? He forged Ord's signature to a big check. Money trouble, all right. Orr hushed the matter up, paid, and said he'd collect from the forger. The banker doesn't even know who the forger is. Congratulations are in order, Sergeant. Our murderer evidently wished to evade repayment. Murders have been committed for less vital reasons. Ellery flourished his pince-nez. I said, Mr. Vincent, that you are eliminated. Eliminated because the only other significance of the amethyst left to us is that it is a birthstone, but the November birthstone is topaz. On the other hand, Mr. Pike has just celebrated a birthday which, and with these words, as Pike gagged and the others broke into excited gabble, Ellery made a little sign to Sergeant Valley and himself leaped forward. But it was not Arnold Pike who found himself in the crushing grip of Ellery and staring into Ellery's armed eyes. It was the newspaper man, Leo Gurney. 4. As I said, explained Ellery later in the privacy of the Queen's living room, and after his belly had been comfortably filled with food. This has been a ridiculously elementary problem. The inspector toasted his stocking feet before the fire and grunted. Sergeant Valley scratched his head. You don't think so? But look, it was evident when I decided that the clues of the clock and the amethyst were intended to convey that Arnold Pike was the man meant to be indicated. For what is the month of which the amethyst is the birthstone? February. In both the Polish and Jewish birthstone systems, the two almost universally recognized. Of the two men indicated by the clock clue, Vincent was eliminated because his birthstone is a topaz. Was Pike's birthday then in February? Seemingly not, for he celebrated it this year, 1926, in March. March 1st, observe. What could this mean? Only one thing. Since Pike was the sole remaining possibility, then his birthday was in February, but on the 29th, on Leap Day, as it's called, and 1926, not being a leap year, Pike chose to celebrate his birthday on the day on which it would ordinarily fall, March 1st. But this meant that Martin Orr, to have left the amethyst, must have known Pike's birthday to be in February, since he seemingly left the February birthstone as a clue. Yet what did I find on the card accompanying Orr's gift of carpet slippers to Pike last week? May we all be together on as pleasant a March 1st to celebrate your 100th anniversary. But if Pike is 50 years old in 1926, he was born in 1876, a leap year, and his 100th anniversary would be 1976, also a leap year. They wouldn't celebrate Pike's birthday on his 100th anniversary on March 1st. Then Orr didn't know Pike's real birthday was on February 29th, or he would have said so on the card. He thought it was March. But the person who left the amethyst sign did know Pike's birth month was February, since he left February's birthstone. We've just established that Martin Orr didn't know Pike's birth month was February, but thought it was March. Therefore, Martin Orr was not the one who selected the amethyst. Any confirmation? Yes. The birthstone for March in the Polish system is the Ludstone. In the Jewish, it's the jasper. But both these stones were nearer a groping hand than the amethyst, which lay in a tray at the back of the case. In other words, whoever selected the amethyst deliberately ignored the March stones in favor of the February stone, and therefore knew that Pike was born in February, not in March. But had Orr selected a stone, it would have been bloodstone or jasper, since he believed Pike was born in March, or eliminated again. But if Orr did not select the amethyst, as I've shown, then what have we? Palpability of frame-up. Someone arranged matters to make us believe that Orr himself had selected the amethyst and smashed the clock. You can see the murderer dragging poor old Orr's dead body around, leaving the blood trail on purpose. Ellery sighed. I never did believe Orr left those signs. It was all too pat, too slick, too weirdly unreal. It is conceivable that a dying man will leave one clue to his murderer's identity, but two? Ellery shook his head. If Orr didn't leave the clues, then who did? Obviously the murderer. But the clues deliberately led to Arnold Pike. Then Pike couldn't be the murderer, for certainly he would not leave a trail to himself had he killed Orr. Who else? Well, one thing stood out. Whoever killed Orr framed Pike and really selected the amethyst knew Pike's birthday to be in February. Orr and Pike we have eliminated. Vincent didn't know Pike's birthday was in February, as witness his inscription on the silver cup. Nor did our friend the ex-Duke, who also wrote March the 1st on his card. Oxman didn't. He said they'd celebrate Pike's 60th birthday on March 1st, 1936, a leap year. Observe, when Pike's birthday would be celebrated on February 29th. Don't forget that we may accept these cards' evidence as valid. The cards were sent before the crime, and the crime would have no connection in the murderer's mind with Pike's 5 birthday cards. The flaw in the murderer's plot was that he assumed, a natural error, that Orr and perhaps the others too knew Pike's birthday really fell on Leap Day, and he never did see the cards, which proved the others didn't know, because Pike himself told us that after the party Monday night, he did not see any of the others until last night, the night of the murder. "I'll be fried in lard," muttered Sergeant Valley, shaking his head. "No doubt," grinned Ellery, "but we've left something out. How about Leo Gurney, the newspaper feature writer? His stick of doggerel said that Pike wouldn't reach the age of 21 for another 9.5 years. Interesting? Yes, and damning. For this means he considered facetiously that Pike was at the time of writing 11.5 years old. But how is this possible, even in humorous verse? It's possible only if Gurney knew that Pike's birthday falls on February 29th, which occurs only once in 4 years. 50 divided by 4 is 12.5. But since the year 1900, for some reason I've never been able to discover, was not a leap year. Gurney was right, and actually Pike had celebrated only 11.5 birthdays. And Ellery drawled, "Being the only one who knew Pike's birthday to be in February, then Gurney was the only one who could have selected the amethyst." Then Gurney arranged matters to make it seem that Orr was accusing Pike. Then Gurney was the murderer of Orr. Simple as a child's sum. This has been The Glass Dome Clock by Ellery Queen, narrated by Mike Vendetti. Production copyright 2025 by Mike Vendetti Productions. www.mikevendetti.com